Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Huda Jawad, and I am the Executive Director of the Faith and Violence Against Women and Girls Coalition. Thank you all for being here. We're delighted to see you. I'd like to begin by sharing a little about who we are. The Faith and Vogue Coalition, or Violence Against Women and Girls Coalition, is the UK's independent expert body on faith, literacy, and violence against women and girls. We work to ensure that survivors from faith backgrounds receive safety, dignity, and holistic care at first contact. We build bridges between faith communities and the Vogue sector so that survivors are understood and protected without having to choose between safety and belief. We have a membership base of 64 members and growing, and membership is currently open. So please head to our website if you are interested in becoming a member. You don't have to be a person of faith or an organization that has kind of a faith-informed approach. You just have to have an awareness and a desire to learn more about how faith plays a role in the work in ending violence against women and girls. So today's session is part of the global 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign, and it's been running since the 1990s, 1991 specifically, to call for an end to violence against women and girls worldwide. We are proud to lead the Faith on Fourth campaign, and the Faith on Fourth campaign was envisaged to fall on the fourth day of the 16 Days of Activism, so that's the 28th of November, today, to highlight the role that faith communities have in tackling violence against women and girls and ensuring that survivors from faith and minoritized communities are supported and understood and their issues platformed. In today's world, we are seeing the growing issue of online harms, which disproportionately affects women of faith and marginalized communities. And that's something that is clearly extremely unacceptable, but also very widespread. Abuse, harassment, and discrimination in the digital space can compound the risk for survivors and the risks they already face, making faith-literate intersectional responses a lot more urgent and needed. So thank you for joining us in this collective effort. Together, we can ensure that faith is never weaponized to harm, but instead becomes a force for justice, dignity, and safety. And without further ado, I'm very proud to introduce to you our moderator for today's session. That's Imogen Resnick. Imogen is a trustee of the Faith and Violence Against Women and Girls Coalition and a former co-chair of a London synagogue. Outside the work of the charity trustee world, she leads on developing a range of Vogue policy and commissioning areas, including tech-enabled and online Vogue for the Mayor of London's Office for Police and Crime. Imogen, over to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Afternoon. It's really great to be here today. I'm really pleased to be chairing this event during the 16 Days of Action Against Gender-Based Violence and to introduce the three fantastic panelists that we've got for you today. So I'll start with Shay Akiwowo. Shay is an international award-winning leader in responsible technology, democracy, and digital citizenship. She is a managing partner at 2120 Studios, a strategy and innovation hub developing systemic approaches to online safety and digital democracy, and an equity partner at WeLivedIt.ai, where she helps build tools tackling online misogyny and harmful digital design. She's a former politician and founder of Glitch, the UK non-profit combating online abuse, and has advised global platforms and influenced major policy, including the UK's Online Safety Act. Her work bridges government, tech, and grassroots communities to build safer and more equitable digital spaces, and her leadership has been recognised by the UN, Amnesty International, Wired, and the government of Finland, and has been featured in the New York Times, The Guardian, and The Wired, and Wired Mag. She's also author of a new book, How to Stay Safe Online. Also really pleased to welcome Emily Chabanu. Emily works at Illuminate Tech, a startup founded by ex-regulators that helps online platforms understand how regulation can be used to address online harms and make safety by design more accessible. At Illuminate, she develops safety measures in collaboration with civil society organizations, and she's particularly interested in how platform design can best tackle online violence against women and girls. And finally, I'm welcoming Misha Gerard. Misha is a postgraduate student, activist, and independent researcher. Her research investigates the architecture of the digital sphere and the dynamics of radicalization, with a particular focus on how algorithmic bias and recommendation systems shape pathways towards variations of misogynistic ideologies and nihilistic or apocalyptic violent extremism. She is also engaged in exploring the ways in which digital systems reinforce gender segregation and the polarization of the sexes. I think there's an incredible bias. I wish I had some of that in my biography, maybe at some point in the future. So I'm going to kick us off with just a little introduction, really, to online harms, and then we'll move into the panel discussion. So online harms is a really broad category of online content, behaviors and interactions which can cause significant harm or distress to individuals. And it's such a massive category, as I'm sure many of you know. It includes harassment and sexist comments on social media, to sharing intimate images to somebody online without their consent, to stalking or doxing, for example, which is the sharing of personal information without consent online. And online harms, in my view, forms part of a broader category of abuses under technology-facilitated violence against women and girls, which is the broader space of how technology and digital tools and spaces are used to harm women and girls. What I'm really pleased with is that the 16 Days of Action this year is highlighting how the digital world is the new frontier of violence against women, and the rapid advancement of technology, often without proper safety measures, is creating new forms of harm and violence against women that didn't exist even 3 years ago, never mind 20 years ago. In the UK, we have introduced the Online Safety Act, which sets out legally different categories of online harm and criminal offences, and we'll be talking about that a bit later on in the panel. But I think it's clear that the pace of technology is so quick that often legislation can't keep up. So we have seen new harms emerge in the past year, for example, through AI that are not covered under the Online Safety Act. And we'll continue to see that technology is breeding new harms when not developed safely or with proper safety measures. So I'm going to turn now to our first speaker, Misha. Can you talk us through the architecture of online harms and how they present?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Imogen, and huge thank you to the Faith and Forward Coalition for bringing us together today. And thanks to everyone here, including my fellow speakers and the audience. I've just been scrolling through your bios as you introduced yourself, and it's such an incredible community to be addressing today. Especially as well, thanks to the women of faith who show up, speak up, and keep pushing these conversations forward, even when the online environment makes that incredibly difficult, as I well know. I want to highlight today that part of what's driving all of this isn't just individual bad behaviour, it's the architecture of the platforms themselves. The way in which these systems are built shapes who gets seen, who gets targeted, and just how quickly harassment escalates. Recommendation systems are programmed to only really understand engagement, and that's what their task is, to maximize. So content that's inflammatory, in these cases, that's content that objectifies, sexualizes, or mocks women, tends to be highly engaging. So the system actually quietly amplifies and essentially rewards the very material that's putting women at risk. I want to use my time today to ground this discussion in something concrete, the way online harms become faith-specific and how that changes both the meaning and the consequences of abuse. I should say I'll be drawing on just a handful of cherry-picked examples today. They're not exhaustive or representative of every woman of faith by any means, but hopefully they'll help to demonstrate the ways in which the digital harms can manifest as faith-specific. When a woman carries visible or cultural signs of faith, whether that be a hijab, a Star of David, a Christian affiliation, or maybe just even a surname that signals belonging, she's read differently online. And abusers exploit that difference, and faith becomes another way of marking her out for punishment. One of the clearest examples come from Muslim women. A journalistic investigation conducted by Glamour shows us how something as simple as a photo without a hijab, or in a short sleeve top, or a vest that shows an individual's midriff, can be used and has been weaponized for the purposes of blackmail, coercion, and threats of honor-based violence. What's important to note here is that that photo may be real, or it may be entirely synthetic, generated by artificial intelligence or the product of a deepfake. Regardless of that, though, the consequences, however, will always be grounded in reality for the victims of image-based abuse. Now, the system at present doesn't recognise these images as intimate or high risk, but the community does, and that mismatch is where the danger sits. These aren't theoretical harms. Women are coerced into sex, extorted, forced into marriage, threatened with being sent back home, or cut off by their families. The digital threat can become an offline crisis very quickly. And Amina's campaign Exposed, which has just been posted in the chat, highlights a couple of case studies of stories there. For Jewish women, the abuse is almost always fused. It's not kind of misogyny over here and anti-Semitism over here, but an attack that blends both. The Anti-Semitism Policy Trust shows us that Jewish women receive sexualized slurs, deepfake imagery, and Holocaust-themed misogynistic abuse online. So it's a double punishment there. They're targeted for being women and for being Jewish in the same breath. Now I'm going to move on to some conspiracy tropes. If you're as chronically online as I am, and I sincerely hope that you're not, one example you may have seen circulating on Twitter or X recently is the phrase Jewish daycare, used to describe women attending university or work. Now, this sounds absurd until you realise that this comes directly from far-right narratives, claiming that feminism, women's education, women's independence, and even sexual liberation as a whole are Jewish conspiracies designed to undermine the white family. So a woman studying or working becomes evidence of supposed Jewish control. This is an example of how gendered anti-Semitism polices all women, not just Jewish women, punishing them for exercising their autonomy. Moving on to Christian women, which I think is something that's under-discussed in these spaces quite a lot. In Christian digital spaces, the abuse often takes a more theological form. Women who speak about domestic abuse or equality are bombarded with versions about submission or modesty, and increasingly this also merges with manosphere culture, so the fetishization of the trad wife aesthetic, where a hyper-polished, hyper-submissive Christian woman is held up as the ideal, and any deviation from that becomes a moral failure. We see, therefore, through these cases how across Muslim, Jewish, and Christian contexts, the pattern repeats. Women are punished simply for being visible, vocal, or in control of their own lives. The abuse changes shape depending on the faith context, but the intention is identical. In terms of what really needs to change, I think we need systems that understand cultural and faith contexts, moderation teams equipped to recognise faith-specific harms, and faith communities that are willing to treat digital abuse with the same urgency as offline abuse. Thank you. I hope that highlighted a couple of things for you guys, and I'll pass back to Imogen.
Thank you so much. And honestly, as a Jewish woman, I sometimes find some of this stuff absolutely bewildering, the things that people come up with online. It's really bewildering, the theories that people come up with. When you yourself live as part of that community, it's boggling, genuinely. I sort of touch upon a little bit what you said, Nisha, about, for example, recommender systems. For those of us in this space who are lay people who don't have a technical background, could you just kind of draw out a little bit more about exactly how these systems work? How can we understand them as a lay person so that we understand why are we seeing this content proliferate online? How does that work?
Sure. So for tech companies, the commodity that they're trying to sell is your attention, essentially. And the way of grasping that attention is through engagement, and engagement is best got when a reaction is elicited. So these recommendation systems, through understanding what generates the most engagement, that tends to be the most inflammatory, the most kind of emotional material, and often the most kind of harmful and stuff. I think that's why it's the same reason why we see quite a lot of political polarization or the spreading of like fake news and misinformation online, because these things grab our attention and they elicit emotions, and the strongest emotions are often the most negative ones. So it gets caught up in a cycle, really, in which, in order to keep people online, to keep people scrolling and engaging, it's rewarding behavior which really should be moderated better, but in the name of profit. So I don't know if that makes sense at all.
It definitely makes sense to me. I think, yeah, it does. I think it makes sense from a layperson's perspective. We've just dropped a couple of links in the chat as well for those who are looking for kind of more detail around this and more kind of wider research as well. But thanks so much. Really, really helpful for setting the scene to understand how this all works. How does the system work online? I'm going to turn to Shay. So you founded Glitch to mainstream the issue of online gender-based violence. Misha talked a little bit about some of the kind of intersectional issues that we see in the online harms space. Can you talk us through in more detail the intersectional issues and kind of draw on your experience of working for Glitch as well?
Yeah, I was not planning to be in this space whatsoever. I was a local politician at the time and saw the conversations about online gender-based violence, saw kind of what people like Diane Abbott and Jess Phillips were facing, or celebrities like Caroline Flack was facing, but never really understood what it meant from a systems level. So I just want to say thank you so much to the Faith and Wall Coalition for facilitating a conversation to talk systemically about this issue rather than just harm reduction. And I think intersectionality allows us a framework to see how different people are impacted by this, to then look on a systems level of how we would address it, rather than keep making the same minoritized communities have to fundraise for the proof and then advocate to address it. And then we end up doing whack-a-mole rather than actually changing the system. So thank you for that. So over the last 8 years, I've been working on mainstreaming the conversation around online gender-based violence. In the digital rights scene, women's experiences of online abuse just wasn't being talked about. When we have conversations around privacy or surveillance or safety, women's voices are not there. Children's voices were there, and that is important. But children are not a monopolized group either. And so there was a real gap in understanding how social media was playing out for everyday people. Part of the work that I did involved going into schools, going into social housing groups to deliver training on digital citizenship, our rights and responsibilities. And it was so hard to, interventions were so hard as young boys, particularly, were getting older. So in year 7, you know, they're really cute and want to impress you and put their hands up. By year 11, they're like, "Miss, I was bullied in school. What's the point?" It's a rites of passage. The hearts were already hardened. And then I could see that school systems were not able to up with what was happening online. We had Snapchat at this time generate a lot of disruption in schools. We had young boys being groomed into gangs and selling drugs in county lines. We had young girls being manipulated into sharing non-consensual images of themselves. And obviously when you're under the age of 16, 18, that's child pornography. There was all of these complex issues that the most vital systems that we need in the world, in our communities, could not grapple, could not understand. And one of the advantages that I think that Faith Group have as being the kind of third sector is being able to bridge the need of what's happening and what's being seen in local mosques, local communities, local churches, and being able to have a position and power within communities to tell local government and to tell national government there needs to be greater resources and investment there. So I did a lot of work working with Anti-Semitism Policy Trust, working with Muslim organizations, working with Christian organizations, working with African spirituality groups and collectives to be thinking about what is the behaviors we want to be seeing online. Intersectionality allows us to see how Black women are disproportionately impacted, how this interlinks with domestic abuse. We can see all of that, but like, what is now the vision and where we are driving this? And the common the common theme from these conversations was that we are losing our ability to have empathy. We are losing our ability to hold multiple truths. We are losing our ability to learn and reflect. Something that we go to our faith institutions or our faith collectives for learning and teaching, and that has fundamentally been eroded. And then the second thing that we're seeing, when you have an intersectional lens and you can bring all of these stakeholders together, not just those that have class privilege, not just those that have gender privilege, but you get to really see the most minoritized. You also see that fear is being used and weaponized, where we know faith is about love and unity, which now feels very cheesy to say in like a cheap Instagram post, but that's what it's been reduced to, where people are now so fearful of either speaking out, fearful of being their authentic self, fearful of expressing themselves, where that is not great for society, but it's also not great for businesses and the economy, which is very short-sighted, I believe, of politicians and policymakers who are pandering to tech companies because of the way the economy is and for money. The fear is also meaning that people are consumers, young people, users aren't expressing themselves, aren't playing, aren't joyful, and so we're having this real stifle of expression and authenticity. And I constantly say to people, and I've said it in my book, that I am who I am because I get to learn from people on the internet. I get to learn of the experiences of Eid and of Shabbat and of the broad church, in which you have orthodox and kind of conservative groups with your more liberal groups. I benefited from learning from that, and because of the stifling of expression and the fear, my concern is that we're going to lose that. We're going to lose diversity. We're going to lose the ability to speak our truth. And then the final thing that I think that intersectional lens allows us to see, and where I think faith play a huge part, is say, what's healthy in society? Like, faith groups, faith institutions have access to historical data that goes centuries and centuries away, that can really map out humanity. And I think it's a real remiss that policymakers are not inviting faith groups into the room to say, we know what happens with humanity when greed and ego and entitlement and fear is in place here. We know what happens when we have the pharaohs and the dictators. We know what happens when our faith is weaponized against us. We know what happens when our faith is weaponized to cause inter-community tensions. And I think that is where policymakers are missing a beat in involving truly diverse and intersectional groups into the conversation. And I'll end with saying that I hope that we can have a conversation about what's next, like what's the tangible things that we can be doing. Now we have mainstreamed the conversation about digital violence, because when I started doing this work, the abuse that I was getting wasn't from men. It was from other women organizations saying, how dare you say that online abuse is the same as online violence? How dare you say that you need more funding? Because again, scarcity mindset, the way that charity sector works, we've got crabs in a barrel situation. So people didn't want a new player, a new harm to be discussed. And so I hope that now that we have mainstreamed the conversation, we have done the work to evidence how real it is and how it disproportionately impacts certain communities, we start to set a vision of what we want for our communities, what we want to be seeing from people who come to our mosques, our synagogues, our housing associations. I hope that we get to start being the technologists and shaping the future, rather than always playing whack-a-mole and clean up the mess that tech bros have made.
Thanks so much. A lot of that definitely resonates with my experience of working in communities. And as Huda said in the chat, I think faith communities can be real spaces where we can kind of bring that empathy back. There's no anonymity, there's no hiding behind this online space. We've got, no picture. You have to be forced to reckon with the person in front of you and have those conversations.
Yeah, if I just may as well, I'd also say that faith groups can prove as well that you don't use fear for engagement. People go to these places for safe havens, for love, for community. It's a choice to set engagement metrics that evoke rage, shame, fear, and harm. There are other human emotions that can be evoked. The fact that there are still amazing faith groups, that have lasted pubs in this country shows that actually there is something that unifies us more in our humanity than what's against us.
Absolutely. You talked a little bit about this work that you've done over the past years in your work with communities, with housing associations, etc. Do you feel like things have gotten better? Do you think things have improved? Or talk a little bit about that.
I think that the barrier to access and being believed has improved. I think you had a lot of gaslighting happening. I think you had a lot of institutional gaslighting that made activist advocates work incredibly hard. I think there is an understanding around safeguarding and duty of care. I think housing providers are understanding how tech gets used by perpetrators to cause harm. But I don't think that the resources are there. I don't think that the flow of money is there. I had the privilege of speaking at Cannes Lion Festival earlier this year in south of France. And guys, honestly, I wanted to vomit, to see all these hotels being taken over by these big brands, Snapchat, Netflix, and being told that they spent $1 million for 5 days on these activations. Activating who? What? When we know that I come from near East London. I come from one of the most deprived areas. I know what £1 million would do for a local youth centre. So that's where I feel like, how do we galvanize as a community, and how do we have this brilliant convening space to say, what power are we taking back? What power are we building? What are we asking for? So that we're not getting breadcrumbs. We're not being asked to fix broken systems. We're being asked to shape and design them.
Awesome, thank you. I'd be interested to hear as well. I see lots of people in the chat work for local authorities, work for housing associations, work for a range of different statutory and other organisations. I'd be really keen to hear from all of you in the chat. What is your experience in this space? Do you feel like you have a good understanding of it and how it intersects with your work as well? And do you feel equipped to deal with this issue? Awesome. Okay, I'm going to move on to Emily. So, Emily, we've heard a lot about the issues in this space, the issues affecting women of faith, the kind of intersectional approach to the issue and how beneficial that is. Can you talk us through a little bit about what tech companies and government have been doing over the past few years to make headway on this issue?
Yeah, thanks, Imogen. And I echo all my fellow speakers. Thanks to Huda, Elsa, for organizing this. I'm so excited to be here. I just want to pick up on what Shay mentioned about these tech bros and these tech companies, because they get to make all the decisions here. Because as we sort of digitize our lives, we find ourselves being sort of at the whim of these companies. And what I mean by that is there's a lot more responsibility now for tech companies to, foster humanity and do the right thing. And I think governments have finally kind of caught up to that sentiment. So the Online Safety Act is arguably the most comprehensive piece of online safety legislation in the world. It's not the only one, but it's arguably the most prescriptive. It aims to do two broad things. The first one is to enforce existing criminal legality with some provisions to address online harms. And then the second arm is to protect children, which is obviously something that's near and dear to all of our hearts. And then there's a third emerging arm, which is with the onset of Ofcom's VOG guidance that was published earlier this week. It was finalized this week, at least, is to protect women and girls. Yeah, so I think historically the way content moderation has worked has been just purely reactive. So someone has to report harm. Who knows how long it takes for a tech platform, this is back in the day, to sort of respond and tackle that harm and take down that content. Now, with the Online Safety Act and the Digital Services Act and e-safety in Australia, we see a more risk-based approach. So the Online Safety Act in particular mandates companies to sort of just sit down and think about how harm manifests on their service and to do a risk assessment. Also, at the end of the risk assessment, Ofcom does which is the UK regulator of online safety, probably more familiar with the person that you go to when you have a complaint about your broadband but yes, the UK regulator for online safety. Basically, they have published codes, so recommended measures that you can kind of get signposted to at the end of your risk assessment. They're not very complex. They center mostly around governance, just like good accountability measures, having someone in charge of trust and safety, having a reporting feature, nothing too groundbreaking. But in the broader guidance, for example, the VOG guidance, we see some really impactful and exciting stuff like abusability testing. So getting platforms to sort of think about the features that they're rolling out at lightning pace, obviously, because they're all about scale. But sort of, for example, thinking about how a geotagging feature can increase the risk of stalking and harassment. So we see stuff like that coming from Upcom. And a major drawback, and this isn't, no tea, no shade to Upcom, but it is drafted for like 100,000 plus services, and services vary. So it is just so broad in how it's sort of written. But yeah, I think maybe I'll stop there.
Thank you. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more kind of how does this legislation fit more broadly into the kind of the global space? Because we know that online harm transcends borders. If you could be a victim of intimate image abuse in the UK and your perpetrator could live in, I'm making up countries here, South Africa, and then somebody can view that image, for example, in France, and kind of the secondary multiple degrees of perpetration and that kind of endless victimization can continue ad nauseum, like, and be any country in the world, really. How does the Online Safety Act tackle that? And is legislation really in a space to be able to tackle that issue? And how do we kind of, I don't know, do we almost need of like meta jurisdiction that covers broader than just the UK? Is that potentially on the horizon in the future? Yeah, talk a bit about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Obviously, tech is global, but the first thing that I would say is that the Online Safety Act protects UK users. So if a female UK user says, "Oh, this is an intimate image of myself that's being circulated," and even if the perpetrator is in Brazil, then it would still have to be taken down. And also, but taking a step back there, the Online Safety Act actually changes the systems and processes of how these companies operate, at least in the UK. So there is a bit of a unalignment, I guess, because I mean, a prominent example is age assurance and how that's being rolled out in the UK. And the whole question of VPNs, and I could just use a VPN and pretend that I'm from New Zealand, for example, and basically just circumvent the measures that are put in place in the UK. I think it's a big problem. I do think we'll see more convergence in online safety regimes, particularly between Europe, the DSA, and the OSA. Again, regulation is always behind tech, but regulation is self-aware. And that's kind of why they're opting for more of this risk-based approach that's a bit broad. There's drawbacks there, but it's also, it's aiming to change how these companies operate. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it's a first important step.
What do you think about the idea of or to anyone really on the panel, are we going to see any kind of meta jurisdiction in the future? Kind of any like virtual courts or virtual policing that will cover kind of the transcendence of these crimes and harms?
We do have that already when it comes to CSAM, so child sexual exploitation images. So we do have a framework because there is a belief that children should be protected and innocent, right? There is a belief around the women don't deserve to be abused because they're a woman. So we're still tackling the narrative and the ideology that women can be dehumanized. Once we do that, then yeah, I think we can see the framework, but we have seen it's possible. We've also seen it's possible that now TikTok last week announced that they will be able to put a kind of hash marking on images that have been generated through AI. But for years, we've been campaigning for sexual violent content to be tagged, or when George Floyd's murder was being spread as poverty porn on these platforms, and we said we'd like them to be marked so that we could opt out of not seeing them, we were told it's not possible. But it seems to be possible when it comes to copyright. When I post videos of me dancing at a dance class, I'm told that I am infringing on Beyonce's rights. But when it comes to wanting to report somebody who is calling me all sorts of things online, it's not possible. So again, what we're being told about possibility is skewed by who is believed to be important, who is believed to be a human being, in my opinion. Hence why I think faith is really important about humanity.
There are choices being made, and it's about who's prioritized. Absolutely. I think the point about copyright is really important because it shows that they've got the capacity to address these things. They've got the capacity to moderate. They want to. It's just about where they funnel those resources in the direction of.
And I will also say that a conversation about regulating social media at such an extent is not in the interest of other stakeholders. It's not in the interest of media. Social media and the way in which algorithms are designed, recommender systems are designed, comes from how tabloid media have been reporting on women's bodies for the beginning of time, and how, you know, look at X Factor, for example, right? X Factor was something we watched once a week on a Saturday, and then it became 2-3 hours long, and then it became the weekends. Like, the attention economy is not a new thing. What we're seeing here is a lack of responsibility and safeguarding. What we're seeing is a lack of choice. So actually, how do we not just try and police this is freedom of expression, this is human rights, because we're too global and too nuanced to do that. How do we give more choice and agency to communities to say, actually, I'm on my period today and I don't fancy seeing content that's going to make me feel even crappy about myself, so I want to be able to not see as much toxicity on the platform. Or actually, you know, it's Shabbat or it's Ramadan, and actually I want to be able to be very self-reflective, and I want to kind of be in my, you know, best higher self, so I don't want to be seeing certain toxic content on the platform. And having choice about what we see, just like we used to be able to decide if I wanted to watch Neighbours or Home and Away, if I wanted to watch Disney Channel or Nickelodeon. We don't seem to have that basic choice of what we are watching and consuming online. So I don't think the conversation is about global frameworks, because there will be so many more stakeholders that are not going to want that, because it will mean them being regulated for their behavior. But I think us having more choice and consumer choice will then drive demand for what we want to be seeing on our online spaces.
That's really interesting. I think, I mean, in my professional life, I work in policies. I think about kind of what's regulation. It's interesting to think that actually that isn't the best way in. And how can we reframe the narrative to go in and tackle the issues using kind of different language, different approaches? We've had a really great conversation about the issues and online harms, the issues facing women of faith in particular, facing minoritized communities. And we've talked as well about some of the difficulties that we have in challenging and tackling these issues with our current frameworks. So what are some of the things that we can do better to protect women of faith online, including how can faith communities themselves and faith leaders play a role in prevention and support of online abuse? And that's to everyone on the panel. I'm not sure, Emily, if you're having a few tech issues, but yeah, do join us when you can. Anyone want to go first? Misha, I'll go to you. I haven't spoken in a while.
Absolutely. I think faith communities, you know, they're often going to be the first port of call for anyone who's experienced abuse of any kind. And they've got a really vital place, I think, with our very online world at the moment, to provide grounded offline spaces which could just allow people to detox from the toxicity of social media. I wrote about this. I did a bit of work for Logging Off Club. I don't know if you guys are familiar. It was started by Adele Walton. She's an incredible woman after her older sister passed away as a result of online harms and abuse, and forums taking advantage of people with kind of mental illness and essentially grooming them into taking their own lives. It's an awful case, but she's been massively proactive in getting those platforms shut down and in pushing the government to kind of implement more online regulation. Logging Off Club is the aim of that initiative, is to kind of provide those grounded offline kind of phone-free spaces as alternative to that kind of hyper connectivity that we're all so used to. And for me, I know that that's where my faith has come in, especially in the past couple of years, to just provide those really grounded spaces where you can connect with other people, where you can connect to the real world, and just exist outside of that, I think, really. But I mean, as well, just generally, I think in supporting their communities, in supporting their women, in platforming women within their communities and their experiences as well. Faith spaces can tend to be quite kind of, as a stereotype, quite kind of like patriarchal and kind of and male dominated. So even just encouraging the women within it to share their experiences.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is so much faith institutions, housing institutions could do on the harm reduction side and on the kind of reimagination side. So on the harm reduction side, I think being able to offer basic digital citizenship education, basic media literacy education, like having that up in like the hallway of your housing blocks around misinformation, pointing them to resources and credible charities that are doing work. And I think there's a role for barbers and hairdressers and eyebrow shops as well. I think we really need to be thinking about media literacy, which is in the Online Safety Act, which often doesn't get discussed. How do we really make sure the community is involved in that? I think the other role that institutions can play is that you are registered CIC or a CIO or a charity, so you have the vehicle and the means of getting grant funding on behalf of the communities that may want to be doing things in your housing association or in your faith groups, rather than those that are impacted by it having to spend time set up an organization to get the money to then do the work. Like, you could be facilitating the infrastructure for innovation on the harm reduction side, so the programs and the training, and also on playing with tech, playing with AI, creating alternatives, open source alternatives. Often, particularly in the diaspora community, I think I want to talk to, because when you go to the global south, like the way that they spend the very little funding they get to have access to is creating alternatives to tech. I had the brilliant privilege of moderating a panel for Mozilla Foundation earlier this month, and was interviewing an indigenous man called Keone from America, who's now in New Zealand working with indigenous communities to create their own AI alternative to be capturing their indigenous language, which they want to prevent from being lost. This is where they get to be in the dreaming and the imagination and in the resistance space than in the reactive space. And then the very final thing that is like short term on our doorsteps is the local elections next year. The far right is making gains, and the far right is doing really well on TikTok, and we aren't seeing alternative institutions be on these platforms. Hire or recruit volunteers from your local groups who can be helping you with alternative content, particularly now that the voting age has been reduced to 16 and 17. It means that there's going to be millions more people, and particularly young people, open to misinformation, gendered misinformation, and in that kind of pipeline for radicalization. So there is so much that can be done by institutions, but I totally get that you're in one of the most difficult positions at the moment with resourcing, and that takes up time for creativity and for thinking outside the box, which is why Huda and the team being able to hold this space to say, like, you don't have to do these things on your own. You can partner and collaborate with bigger organizations or smaller organizations. So it's not reinventing the wheel, but there is so much that could be done to at least resist the gains that I think we're going to be seeing in May.
Just
Come on,
quickly,
Misha.
sorry, on the point you made about young people, say there's we're seeing a huge unprecedented surge at the moment of young people engaging with religion and faith and attending churches and stuff like that. And I think with that, there's a really huge opportunity. I think at the moment, there's a real fear that I feel that narrative and that religious narrative is being, especially when it comes to the huge numbers of young men who are kind of, exploring their faith and stuff, that narrative is being taken over by manosphere figures like Andrew Tate, like Conor McGregor, who use faith as a way of shielding themselves from, accusations of abuse and stuff. These are abusers who are weaponizing their faith in order to deflect any kind of accountability. So I feel like it's really important that, we have kind of good role models within our community who are able to, be good kind of role models and leaders for the huge amount of young people who are joining faith communities, so that they practice their faith in the right way and in a positive way and in a way that brings them closer to women rather than pushes them apart.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we've discussed here, I think faith has such a powerful role to play in terms of you're in spaces with people who are different to you, who might have different views, come from different backgrounds. And then faith spaces can be real unifiers across difference, in the way that in online spaces we are often kind of stuck in our own little world, and we only see what's on our own platform, for example, when we're scrolling through. And I think faith is a real way to counteract that. But at the same time, with power comes, I suppose, great responsibility. If that's co-opted, then those leaders can be pushing even more potentially harmful content, using the use of scripture online to kind of justify misogyny or justify harmful practices, comes up a lot as well. And so there is unfortunately that balance. And again, this is why the power of the Faith and War Coalition to challenge some of those practices and to push for good faith leadership around VORG. I mean, we've just been discussing, talked a lot about the issues around online harms and challenges that we're facing, kind of thinking about what can we do to tackle and make online spaces safer for women of faith. I know you've got a lot of experience around the Online Safety Act. Could you talk a little bit about maybe what we can do to improve that for women of faith?
So I think faith leaders should engage directly with civil society, because civil society has a pipeline into how legislation or guidance really is drafted. That's the first thing off the top of my head. I think also what tech platforms can be doing. Oh boy, where to start? Well, what I think we will see very shortly is more transparency around how well they're mitigating the risk of hate. And Ofcom has really stood its ground recently and said, no, we want you to basically disaggregate the data and show us exactly the misogynistic hate that's being manifested on your platform versus other forms, which is big. And I think at least having the platform sort of air that out, it provides more evidence for the regulator to sort of go back and sharpen their toolkit. In terms of incorporating more, I personally believe that Ofcom hasn't really done a good job with explaining to regulated services how intersectionality actually plays a role. They sort of just say, take into account intersectionality, and that's all they say. And these platforms, and besides the big tech platforms, even the ones that want to do the right thing and they're mid-size, the compliance / trust and safety teams are so lean. They just don't have time to go through all these pages of guidance, or they don't have the money to outsource a big fancy consultancy, which is basically the people that have been historically doing this sort of work. I think engagement, also not to plug ourselves, but we're working with expert organizations more broadly to introduce best practice into our platform. We're building a product that basically helps services comply with online safety regimes around the world at a fraction of the cost, and we produce more robust risk assessments than the ones that we've been seeing from services. So we're working with civil society and our expert organizations to basically close that asymmetry of information gap between what's out there. There's so many organizations that know how these harms are manifested, including faith-based organizations. And we just want to basically incorporate their tools and frameworks and whatever they have into, to get them in front of the regulated services. Because I do just want to sort of maybe end on the point that, yes, we have big tech, but we also have middle tech. And not that, I'm thinking about smaller platforms than Meta, for example. They do exist. We do use them. And they do, at some point, now with compliance as a motivation, they want to do the right thing. So it is about showing them what those things are.
Awesome. Thank you. This has been a really fantastic conversation. I've learned a hell of a lot. And so I'm going to open up now to questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please put up your hand or post a comment in the chat. Hi, I can't see your name, but you've got your hand up. El Masson, come in.
I am. Firstly, just like to say thank you to all the speakers today. Everybody is speaking so eloquently about a topic that I think is really difficult and also worrying, I suppose. I guess my question is a bit around faith leaders and their do you feel or is there a space for faith leaders to keep engaged with this topic? I find that some of our faiths, all of our faiths are quite old, they're old, but the problems we're facing are new. And sometimes I feel like the congregation or the community perhaps is more upskilled than the faith leaders. And I find that really challenging sometimes because if I feel in a space where I want clarity or to have a deep conversation about my concerns like this and how that impacts my life as a person, I sometimes want to have that with not a peer, but with, somebody, a faith leader. And I sometimes feel a bit like I'm sharing the concerns, but they're not really registered. So I don't know, it might just be me, but yeah, it's just kind of like, is there a space and what can we do if there is to help that? Because yeah, like I said, I just feel it's worrying and it's
Thanks. I'll throw it out to the panelists and maybe also if anyone from the coalition would like to come in on that as well. Really appreciate your thoughts.
Just so I make sure I understand the question, Lauren, are you saying how can we build the capacity of faith leaders to engage with these new harms?
Yeah, I think so. Where is there spaces or how can we create spaces for them to learn about these, new concerns that the congregation or their community have? I said it because it sometimes feels that we do have a really in-depth knowledge of some of these concerns, but it's not always replicated with our faith leaders. But then I feel like on the other side, is there anywhere for them to go to learn about these concerns? And
yeah,
what can we do?
Yeah, there's nothing stopping faith leaders attending these sessions, right? That's the first one. This can be seen as a kind of capacity building exercise, and Huda mentioned at the beginning that the membership is open. So if there was more faith leaders here, they could decide, okay, we are here because we want some capacity building. I'm sure the group would want to serve the members. But I think I want to challenge the idea that we're in times that are new, where it's the same tactics of supremacy, of entitlement, of oppression. It's just a new tool. So the language that we need to be using is around again, humanity, empathy, intentionality, values, holding difference, commonality, love, where faith leaders don't need to be tech experts because everyone should be able to slay in their lane. But actually, where do we carve out a role where they can teach us about slowing down, patience, accountability? I learned about grace from growing up in the church, right? I learned about the scripture that talked about, if you've got beef with your brother, you go talk to him privately, and then you go and call someone else. You don't go straight on social media and cancel people, right? So there are ways in which I think how we exist as indifference and how do we exist as humanity that faith leaders can bring into the conversation. But I think what ultimately is an uncomfortable conversation to have is that alongside distrust of government and media, there is a growing distrust of faith institutions because they haven't done the process of repair and reconciliation, right? We are now seeing with the Church of England that they're doing a lot around like reparations work, but I think they have to do a lot of work to walk the walk before now trying to call out another institution for not walking the walk, which is an uncomfortable thing to say, but that's why Huda asked me to join you guys.
Thank you.
Huda, would you like to come in on that? Something to think about. I mean, I was just thinking, you know, next campaign line of work is not getting with faith leaders.
Absolutely, yeah. As you see, put in the chat that I think faith leaders have a vital role to play, but they're probably the most disenfranchised and kind of the most disengaged. I certainly in my faith community, and exactly as Lauren said, the faith leadership is kind of a particular age and generation, which then leaves a gap for younger, usually men, who have much more literacy around technology, and what that creates then is a vacuum of those with the most skill in the online world, with some information, if you want to call it about faith, monopolizing the space. And that's another manifestation of patriarchy, using online tech and faith to ensure that women are silenced, particularly women of faith, and women are policed. And so what we tend to have is the online space with faith being used to reconfirm and reinforce gender stereotypes and ways of behavior. So, for example, women leaders in faith are never highlighted, and if they are highlighted, they can form the patriarchal interpretations of what a woman's role is. So in our tradition, we have the prophets' wives or their daughters, but they're always portrayed as these victims, as these women who were never seen in the public space, who are never out there in community, in civic society, which is absolutely not the true facts of history. We have historical records showing these women being right there in battle, or in like verbal battles, and in kind of public speaking, and having a very, very important public role. But because our traditional faith leadership doesn't have that skill, and also in many cases there is patriarchal interpretations of religion that are completely normalized, and so what we have is a replication of in real life in online space, but more pernicious because there's tech bros that know exactly how to use and game the algorithm for that reinforcement. So I think what we do need is, and I put this in the chat, I wonder if there are tech companies or coalitions, like Emily said, that are not the giants, but the mid-techs and small, that are willing to engage with this work in a more collaborative way, to say to faith communities or to anyone who's interested, because this is how we work together, this is what we can do, these are the skills that you have, particularly as increasingly faith spaces are being digitalized. We have WhatsApp groups that do prayers together, we have like sermons and congregations on Zoom and all of that stuff. So I think we need to have faith literacy that serves spirituality, but also understands that spirituality is not devoid, as Shayi says, used as a tool of patriarchy. So I think that's a real gap that we need perhaps filling. Sorry.
No. I think that's a great idea. I'm struggling to kind of balance my role as facilitator and kind of want to come in here with some ideas. I think, yeah, I mean, also for me, it gets me thinking about that broader digital literacy point. And I think minoritized communities are more likely to have kind of lower rates of digital literacy, and like what's the broader upskilling that we can do there in our communities. I'm going to come to Nell. Would you like to come in?
Hey there. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. So I run a theatre and participation arts charity that works specifically with people living with post-traumatic stress. And we've done quite a lot of work around spiritual abuse, and especially whilst we were working on a particular project around spiritual abuse, we became very keen on creating space for theatre makers and artists of faith, because and I'm kind of pulling back to a comment that was made very early on in this conversation about the content that gets looked at is the most salacious or the most kind of angry or the most polarizing. And I think that pulls a lot of people of faith, and especially women of faith, out of the arts and especially out of the performance arts. And I constantly come across this in my work, is that when we engage with survivors often don't want revenge, right? Especially when we're coming from kind of faith backgrounds. We want solutions, we want discussion, we want balance, we want to work with perpetrators to find out why it's happening, and to create systemic change that you've been talking about. That's not sexy for some reason. So and so a lot of our work, it's when programmers do want to program work that is challenging, they want it to be full of rage, and that in itself is extractive, and that's destructive for the artist and for potentially for the survivors watching, etc. So I guess what I'm asking is, as people leading in this field, talking to someone like me who, although theatre is a different content creation format than social media, we do still put stuff out on social media, we still do have an online presence, we still do put out films and things. What would you want someone like me to be doing to challenge the idea that the fun stuff to watch is the polarizing stuff and the angry stuff and the revenge porn and all the rest of it?
Who would like to go in on that? It's a tough, I think, because if we think about how it plays into the attention economy as well, it's a hard ask. I'll throw it out. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I'm happy to come in on that one if people are. I think really the art spaces are absolutely vital in the next 5 to 10 years in ensuring that we create that space for education and infotainment, I guess. I think increasingly, using the online space to drive people into theatre and art spaces in real life is a really important strategy, because I think increasingly people are thinking that we need to be on social media and adapt as in that space alone. But I think what we miss a trick is that when we stay in that space and not use it as a door to something else. And so I think what I would really kind of ask is that social media engagement by the arts space is used to ask people to come together in real life, to ask people to have conversations, and to also platform the fact that, doing mini series, like we tried to do this, with very limited resources around Islamophobia Awareness Month last year. And we worked with one of our members, Inclusive Mosque Initiative, to talk about what that looks like, particularly in the Vogue space. So I think it's these nuanced conversations that are segmented, I guess, for want of a word, and have specific audiences, can be, used to work around how online violence against women and girls and faith literacy can work together within culture, because faith exists within culture and the two are intimately connected. So if we use these to drive conversations and educational awareness campaigns and to engage our faith leaders and communities, I think, and the next generation of faith leaders is really, really vital. And we're really happy to work with you on that in any shape, way or form. So
Shay, come in.
plus one to what Huda said, because I was struggling, because I don't think that the solution is for everyone to always be online. Yes, there's a lot of people there. We need to meet people where they're at. But I agree with Huda around this kind of like funnel to other third spaces. That doesn't mean that we're always just online. The second reflection that came up was in the pandemic. Social media was heavily reliant on the arts, right? Creating dance moves, baking bread, like quizzes, like that was super creativity was what was keeping these platforms going. And so I think they need to be reminded of that, so they don't just always go down the shame and outrage. And I think the other reflection that came up when you were talking about the role of the arts in this space is around content moderation. I know I sit in a very privileged and sometimes very difficult position where I have probably more than most a relationship with platforms to try and influence them from the outside in. And one of the things that I was exposed to was around how infotainment, so how arts and culture is used to perpetuate violence against women and girls. So does everyone know about the TV show Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
There was a trend where clips of the particular scenes, if everyone's watched it, you probably know what I'm about to get to, where there's a particular character who's about to be raped. It's one of the most horrific graphic scenes, and there was lots of complaints about it. But there was a trend in which perpetrators, I don't want to assume that they were men, perpetrators were showing the clip just before the ginger character, I forgot what her name was about to be raped. And it was just enough for it to not violate the platform's guidelines, because it was not an actual sexual assault. But we all know that we all know what they're getting at. So it's where these nuances of where art and culture is now being used to rig the content moderation platforms that I think we should just we should be aware of. I hope I've given some reflections to your questions. If I've not, please say in the chat, and I'll think through some more.
From my perspective, I'd be interested also to kind of think about what is the role potentially of arts and theatre to help people recover from experiences of online abuse. How can they use arts, theatre, that space to help process their trauma and kind of recover and kind of move on?
I'm doing this. I've designed this leadership program called Control Systems Heal, where it's training up 20 Black and minoritized movement leaders with the Chanel Foundation and Global Fund for Children. And part of the design of the course was around play, where we had a script writer, an improv person come in and help these leaders. We're trying to understand tech, understand some of the harms and the osmosis of tech. So the fear of failure, the fear of getting cancelled, the creativity, thinking in binary ways. We use the arts, and we brought the art scene together to help facilitate this workshop with leaders who've just been feeling so restricted for all the other reasons that we can't blame tech for, where sometimes I try and find a pattern, and also because of tech. And so I do think there is a way in which arts and culture could be helping the next leaders who are on the front line of fascism, of resistance, of advocacy, to have more play and joy in their work. Like, we can't do this work from a place of being defeated and a place of fear and a place of scarcity. Like, that perpetuates the system, and that means we end up being more likely to cause harm. And I talk a lot about this in the book, that how to stay safe online also is an individual act. It's about what we do to make sure that we are regulated and that we are safe, and that we know the saying that hurt people. So I do think there is a role of the arts to help shed some of the wounds and guardedness that we've had to learn as resilience to the harms of because of the harms online.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I hope that was helpful for your question. Now I can't see in the chat anymore, but
absolutely, thank you.
Awesome, some food for thought. Great. I did see a hand go up a couple, but it's gone down again. I'm not sure if that person would like to come back and raise their hand again.
Well, it's kind of like a bit of a half-baked kind of reflection, thinking a bit about what Nao was saying and about sort of the role of arts and kind of, I guess what came to my mind was that a lot of young people recognize the harm that being constantly bombarded with that harmful content, they don't feel good. It doesn't feel nice. And is there something about using these spaces to be able to say, it's okay, like, this doesn't feel good. Lots of people don't feel good seeing this, and like, I don't know, exploring that and then using that as a space to kind of collaboratively and I guess motivate them to identify ways that they can seek other spaces, and yeah, that kind of coming offline. And but again, also it shouldn't always be the responsibility of like young people or the people who are being exposed to that harmful material. Shouldn't be their responsibility to not be exposed to that material in the first place. That should be the responsibility of tech companies. But it's also, like you were saying as well, say that actually we all have to take individual accountability for it. And so providing them with that kind of space where you can say you have a choice, you don't have to. Yes, it's on social media and everybody's on there, but actually if this feels bad, that's okay, and it's okay to acknowledge that and find something else and find a safe space, and here's an alternative, I guess. I mean it's a bit blue sky thinking, and you know that's half the problem, is that it's tricky, isn't it? But yeah, that was just what kind of went through my mind, I guess.
The trend at the moment is youth well-being for tech companies, because the ban of some for those that don't know, there is a trend of governments around the world banning smartphones for certain age groups. And in Australia it was under 16s last week. So politically, tech companies are now trying to go to other markets, aka other countries, to show that they are doing all of these things to keep young people's well-being at the heart of what they do, to offset the trend where France and other countries are considering banning smartphones at certain ages. And I think that is where I would recommend as a strategy to be saying, well, this is how you can be you being platforms, be thinking about your corporate partnership responsibilities, and so your ESG. So we don't want the version of greenwashing when it comes to violence against women and girls. But they do have a duty to because I believe in a reparations model, to fund and give back to youth. And I think that could be the restoration of youth community centres. I'm a product of my local youth group, Community Links in East London. I'm a product of there being the welfare state, of EMA, of Sure Start centres, and that's something that I think tech companies could be reinvesting in, is that third space. The second thing that I think can be done with the arts, and what you were saying, is it Adele or Adela?
It's Adler.
Adler, sorry. Any excuse to use the word Adele. Adele's my favorite singer. Adler is the preventative stuff. So I'm a millennial where I got to work in the arts and performing arts scene, and then was on social media. So I kind of was able to practice my voice and my expression through role-playing activities, through dancing and all of that. And that's been lost, right? So if we had young girls who we know are at risk of self-censoring because of online abuse, because they see people being abused online, why aren't there girls programs that are about them finding their voice again? We've had these kind of campaigns in sports, right? This girl can do swimming, this girl can do arts and stuff, right? Let's bring that back around, performing arts and music being a way in which children get to play and grow and express themselves, so that there's a robustness when they interact with tech. Because if it's not Disney Channel and Nickelodeon when it was me growing up, it's social media now. It will be something else in the future. And I think it's that grassroots resilience that we could be building with arts and culture.
Nisha, do you want to come in on that?
Cheers, thank you, Imogen. Yes, just off the back of your question reflection, Adele, I just popped in the chat a really fantastic report that came out, I think, like the week before last, by Demos. It's called Inside the Mind of a 16-year-old, and it's basically what forms the basis of the report is over 700 interviews with young people aged about kind of 14 to 16 who will probably have the vote in the next general election, and that's from all across the UK. And it's a really accessible report, and it digs quite deep into young people's experiences of social media and the online world and their own reflections on it, and kind of what they wish adults and policymakers and stuff would know. And I'd really encourage it as reading for anyone and stuff. As far as policy reports go, it's fairly engaging, and not as dry as most. And I mean, I know I, for one, when reading through it, was really struck by just the eloquence of which that younger generation, I mean, they're not that much younger than me, I'm talking about people about 10 years younger than myself, but spoke about online harms and their experiences of things like recommendation systems and echo chambers and all of that.
Thanks so much. I'll definitely check that out. I've already downloaded it. Emily, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on the point that Shay made about tech companies after like Australia. So for context, Australia ended up banning social media for under 16s, and then they issued this age assurance technology trial after the fact, which was the timing of that was a bit strange. But essentially, yeah, you're seeing tech companies now scramble around and like put lots of emphasis on like youth well-being. And I do definitely think that they should be funding youth programs, youth community centers, etc. But if they don't change how they operate, aka like if they don't make their platforms less addictive, then it is effectively not enough. Also, the next thing is here, Gen AI, ChatGPT, how that's being sort of incorporated into education, into children's personal lives. We see Sam Altman going around and saying that basically entry-level jobs should be replaced by ChatGPT. He doesn't directly say that, but it's very implicit. And it's affecting youth, it's affecting young people. And yeah, I'm just extremely worried about it. I don't think regulation's equipped to deal with how Gen AI is going to change everything. But yeah, I think it is such a problem to get. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, I was like on Omegle and Kick, and I'm 24, and I was just doing some really crazy stuff. And now I think it's even worse in a way. And so, yeah, I think it is about getting children to be more, aka in the real world, like just with their communities. And that's unfortunately dying, and tech companies have a role to play. I mean, it is reparations at the end of the day, in rebuilding that and bolstering those spaces.
I think also just to add, I was really interested to hear what you're saying, Shay, earlier about kind of how can we create alternative online communities. The Indigenous example you gave, I think, is a really good example of kind of creativity with the technology to create the communities that we want to see, and what moves we'll see towards that in the future. I hope we'll make more moves towards that. I can see we've got one more question in the chat. We've got Kiara. Would you like to come in?
Thank you so much, everyone who's spoken today. It's been just such an insightful session. I had a question more about some of the content we might see on social media. I think we mentioned the kind of trad wife trend, these sorts of things that seem to be popping up everywhere. For me, as someone who's studied theology, I find it very interesting that lots of these kind of trends have theological roots, and they might have very rich, valuable theological roots about how we can live our lives. What happens when these things are taken and kind of really just squashed into like a 30-second video trend where you see like a beautiful woman in a dress with her freshly baked loaf of bread, but actually offers us no theological value? They maybe sell us a bit of a concept of something that, without interrogating deeper and further, it could actually bring some real spiritual trauma if we can only engage on like a superficial level. What should tech companies be doing about, sharing information is super valuable, but what happens when information can be a bit superficial or not explore the deep, long history and tradition behind maybe just something that someone is cosplaying as, rather than giving their audience like proper information on?
Misha, you mentioned trad wives earlier, so I'm going to come to you.
Yes. No, that's a really fantastic observation. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think, yeah, I mean, it's the perils of short form content that I think that we're all falling victim to and stuff. You know, when you compress something in that way, as you said, it loses all capacity for any kind of nuance. And that nuance is so vital and so important, especially when it comes to something that's got theological relevance and kind of spiritual significance and stuff like that, because that's how you then get that kind of flattening of scripture that allows for its weaponization by people who would like to kind of sort women into these neat categories of you know, trad wives, and you know, they've got their ranch, they've got the husband, they've got their oversupply of children, but we're not shown the reality of that in life. You know, you're shown, it's the same as like with you know, influencers and stuff like that, or you know, the rise of OnlyFans models. You're shown just such a small sliver of that lifestyle and what it looks like, and it's what they're choosing to present, but you don't see anything beyond that about what the reality it is to live that kind of a life and to kind of embody that kind of role of, you know, the domestic housewife. You know, there's a huge romanticization of the 1950s going on at the moment on social media, and you know, I'm not quite sure how we deal with that, because I feel like it's too late to roll back on short form content. I think it's where things like education can come in, really robust awareness of, you know, religious education, history as well, you know, a kind of proper understanding of what the last century was like to live as a woman and stuff.
Yeah.
That, you know, you don't just buy into these very kind of romanticized versions that we see online.
Absolutely. Just very mindful of time. Shay, if you can make it literally 10 seconds. Keywords.
Try. First thing I will say that the trad wife trend is a lot more nuanced than is being discussed. This is a backlash. Some of it is a backlash to girl boss feminism. The idea of women being told they could have it all and they don't want to. So I think there is a bit more of a nuanced conversation to have there around the failure of economic policy and the limited choices women are having to go to. The second thing is I think this is a shame that TED, the platform that does like long conversations, they've been platforming increasingly tech bros and kind of following that kind of short form content. So there is a gap in the market for a TED style masterclass long series, right? There are people now wanting to go to National Geographic, and there is a kind of response to this short form that we are seeing on alternatives. And I guess I just want to end here that we are seeing tech design things in a certain way and we are unhappy. But if we always think that it's to go to tech companies to create solutions on their own business model, we'll be chasing our tail. I really want you guys to be seeing yourselves as like future technologists where you can get funding to create your own alternative platforms and spaces, your own websites, your own forums. It doesn't have to be telling someone else's business model to do better. We do need to do that. But I think in terms of where we're spending our time and attention, I think it's a bit imbalanced.
And on that note, I'm going to thanks to all the panelists very, very much for the really insightful, fascinating conversation. We've spun such a range of different topics. It's given a lot for me to think about. I'm sure a lot for everybody's audience to think about, and as well for the coalition to think about in terms of what we can do for next steps and kind of use the coalition's voice to really make the case to better protect women of the faith online. And on that, I'm going to hand back to Huda to wrap up.
Thank you, Imogen. Thank you, everyone. It's such a fascinating conversation. I wish we had more time. I just to say my opinion about what we can ask from tech companies in terms of theology. Nothing. They should not be in charge of theology. I think we just need more women and progressive voices in theological spaces to step up, and we need more faith literacy, hence why I'm plugging faith literacy for the Faith and World Coalition. Having said all of that, I want to ensure that I thank the amazing panel and our moderator for just giving up their time so selflessly and to like just we literally just dipped our toes in. It's been so fascinating. I have learned so much, and I really, really appreciate you all showing up and helping us navigate and talk about this from a faith-informed perspective. Thank you also to the organising team behind the scenes, Zara and Elsa, and everybody who's helped us, and the other Zara. And we have 2 Zaras, we're so lucky. And also to all of you for showing up and turning up. Please go to our website, sign up to our mailing list so that you get informed of what we're doing. And if you want any of your faith communities to be having conversations about domestic abuse or tech or any of that, don't hesitate to contact us. And if you wish to become a member, go to the website and sign up. We look forward to welcoming you to the movement to end violence against women and girls.